If you want some basic tips for getting out into the countryside, setting up a camp and having a brew, stay tuned. It's a quick foray into a local area of woodland that's not very well used because it's so near to the motorway you can hear in the background. Nevertheless, it's a good little area for practicing basic skills. As I walk along the path, there are plenty of plants on either side for identification and possible use. I've checked the area out on the map, which I've got in my pocket. As we get further into the woods, the paths divide and get smaller. So we're going to take a smaller path here and eventually go off to the left uphill. In summer, this will be dry and parched. In the rest of the year, it's going to either be damp or more likely muddy. This ought to be noted on your mental map of the area. Doesn't take much for the ground cover to change. If trees change, so does the ground cover. A lot depends on the amount of light. The sphagnum moss shows that this area is usually quite damp. Planted trees, as opposed to natural woodland, usually give regular spaced trees, and these are great for setting up improvised shelters, unlike in a naturally self-seeding wood where the trees are much more randomly spaced. It's worth spending a bit of time looking for a suitable site to put up your improvised shelter. However, wherever you choose to put up your improvised shelter, you should try and keep it off people and game tracks. It's dark and it's damp. I'll look for somewhere much more suitable. Having seen the number and spacing of the trees, it's now time to look up to see if there are any widowmakers, trees or branches that are likely to fall on you if the wind should get up. Here we have some ramsons or wild garlic. These grow in damp places, so again another reason to look for another site to set up our improvised shelter. This tells us that this area is used and used fairly frequently by people who don't really care about the environment. This area needs to be avoided. It's amazing what you can find if you go just off the beaten track. Here we've got a well-made sturdy shelter which unfortunately has been used and abused and left full of rubbish. Ferns too are a good indication that this ground is damp. Despite being so close to a motorway, you can hear the bird song. This area is used, but not that much, so it's worth checking out the flora and fauna on a regular basis. Use your compass, but also make use of natural phenomenon such as the position of the sun to keep track of the direction and the progress you're making. Ferns, although plentiful, do not make good bedding. They squash down too far. There's no loft in them. Although they're good when they're dry for tinder, they're no good for bedding at all in any season. Here we have brambles or blackberries. Not ready yet, but they will be in autumn, and they're easy to collect from near the path. We can see the edge of the wood. Once we're there, it's a good time to take an accurate pinpoint of exactly where we are on our map. It's always interesting to go on a walk and find new things. This strange object is probably the remains of an old power pylon. It's worth looking on an old map to find out. This is a type of area where we're more likely to find widowmakers than the last one. Older, mature trees, some of them dead. These are dangerous, so stay away. A small little valley or burn, or for our American viewers, a creek. Although it doesn't seem to have much water here, it's worth following it downhill to try and find a source of potable water. And if it's not potable, make it so. Filter, boil, sterilize. Don't forget, you're out here to enjoy yourself, or at least practice skills. But it is worth stopping, listening, observing and enjoying. Footpaths at the side of fields are easy to follow. However, it's very easy to spot anyone using them. So if you're going wild camping or going covert, stay off tracks like this. Look for a suitable campsite. Here seems good. It's young trees. It's open and sunny, but the ground seems to be a little bit bumpy. Alright, it's a good place to further investigate if you've got time. It's wet, and you could dig an Indian well nearby and then filter, boil and steritab. But in the short term, it's easier to carry water with you. Carry enough for a day and a little bit more. If we've identified them on the map, the telephone wires are a good check for your navigation. If the worst comes to the worst, you follow them out of the area. We can see plenty of reasonably thick, reasonably straight, well-growing pieces of wood ready for us to use, but only if we have the landowner's permission. It's a good idea to pay some heed to signage, as this gives you an indication of what should, what shouldn't, and what does happen in the woods. A few meters further on, and the ground cover's changed once again. More mature trees, less of them, and more ground cover of ferns, flowers and brambles. It's worth checking out the whole area before you decide where you're actually going to set up your camp. Well, we've come across a water source, but it doesn't look too healthy, considering that this is the early part of the summer and it's been raining quite considerably recently. This is going to dry up by high summer. Okay, we've chosen the location to set up our bivvy. First thing to do is to take our pack off and put a coat on so that we don't cool down and get muscle cramps and spasms and even a chill. Our bivvy is set up. It's set up as a windbreak with something to keep your bottom dry when you sit down. The next thing to do is to have a quick brew. I have the cooking system in one bag. Again, keep everything in one place where you can see it. Open it out and have the valve and the striker where you can get at them. Measure out the required amount of water. It helps if your cup has got quantity marks on them. Put the top on your water in case you spill it, and again put it back in the bag. It's a good idea to have a stove that has its own ignition system. Test your pot is firm before you actually use it, and then away you go. Now's the time to get on with other jobs while the water heats up. In windy conditions, the wind will rob you of a lot of heat, so use a windbreak. Do use a lid on your pot. It cuts down the cooking time and it also reduces the amount of fuel that you actually use. Put some tape round the rim so you don't burn your lips. While you're waiting for the water to reach a drinkable temperature, dry and pack away the rest of your cooking gear. It's much easier to clean things while they're hot and warm than it is when they've cooled down and things like sauce are solidified.
With your pack-up routine, the first thing to do is to see what you need to pack up. Count the items. Collect them in an easy identifiable place where they can be seen, and try not to fold fabric and nylon in the same place every time. Clean off your tent pegs. This reduces the weight and stops them rotting.
If you can, keep all the contents of your rucksack in waterproof bags. Colour coded makes getting things out and putting them back easy, and if they're inside a larger waterproof bag, it means you can put wet items inside the dry bag but yet keep the rest of your kit dry. The last thing to do before you set off is take off your extra layer and put it back in the dry bag ready for use. This water looks pretty grim, and it is. The discolouring on the water is not oil, it's the water being held back by rotting vegetation. This is a sign that the water is not flowing very freely, so find another water source if you can. This water source, although not great, doesn't have that horrible nasty scum on top, and at least it is flowing. So it would be a much better source for you to filter, boil and sterilise. If you're not exactly sure where you are, one idea is to find a bigger path and follow that. If you've got some idea of the direction because you've got a compass or you're watching the sun, that's even better. Thank you to everyone who watches, comments and hopefully subscribes. I hope you found these basic tips helpful for when you get out there. Get training. You know it makes sense. It will serve you well.